Fight Club has remained one of the most beloved and recognizable films for over 20 years, consistently ranking high on lists of the greatest films of all time. Audiences continue to see themselves in the characters, and Brad Pitt and Edward Norton are widely acknowledged as one of the most memorable duos in cinema history. The Pixies song "Where's My Mind" is likely familiar even to those who have never watched Fight Club, and many lines from the film have become iconic quotes.
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
At the same time, the status of a classic film, practically a favorite movie of the whole family, does not suit this sharp and rebellious work and seems to deprive Fight Club of some of its revolutionary, marginal charm. Even over 20 years later, it remains painfully relevant, capable of explaining much about ourselves and the world around us. While much has been said about David Fincher's film, in this video, we'll explore how this work looks today. What anxieties of Generation X are reflected in Fight Club? What are the unique features of the direction? And what do the creators say about the crisis of masculinity? And remember,
the first rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club.
At the turn of the millennium. It's hard to imagine today, but in the year of its release, Fight Club was not a box office hit and did not bring commercial success to its creators. On the contrary, it was one of the most scandalous films of the late 20th century, criticized from both sides for excessive violence, propaganda of extremism, abundant profanity, and teenage nihilism. Some critics even suspected Fincher of subtly nodding to fascism.
His name is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson.
Come on, guys,
His
please,
name
stop it.
is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson.
Strangely enough, this contradictory reception from both the press and the audience best indicates that the film hit its mark precisely. At first glance, the 90s in the history of the United States were a time of consumer comfort and economic prosperity. But, on the other hand, society by the end of the decade was in anxious anticipation of the millennium, which was reflected in particular in the opioid crisis, the HIV epidemic, and a surge in violence.
An Exedor procedure at 30,000 feet. The illusion of safety.
A few months before the film's premiere, America was shocked by the mass shooting at Columbine High School, and Fight Club with its expressive violence triggered unpleasant associations for early viewers. For the history of cinema, the 90s were a time when, alongside recognized masters who began their careers in the mid-20th century, young directors boldly asserted themselves. Unafraid of controversial themes and experimenting with modern technologies, these filmmakers navigated the intersection of old and new, conformity and rebellion, hope and fear, giving rise to movies as Fight Club. Interestingly, in the same year, 1999, American Beauty and The Matrix were released, both challenging conventional notions of suburban happiness and reimagining the image of the middle-class citizen. A year later, American Psycho emerged as a dark satire on the culture of young yuppie office professionals. According to David Fincher himself, the adaptation of Chuck Palahniuk's novel was conceived as a coming-of-age story. The updated version of Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean and Mike Nichols' The Graduate, two important films in the mid-20th century that dealt with youth rebellion and generational conflict in the post-war era. The difference lies in Fincher's film, where the role of the enraged youth is taken over by a dissatisfied man in his 30s. The unnamed narrator, played by Edward Norton, undergoes a largely typical journey of self-discovery, realizing his otherness and internal inferiority. He engages in radical actions, but ultimately reevaluates his views on rebellion, finding a new normalcy for himself.
You met me at a very strange time in my life.
In the 90s, it was not entirely clear to many that Fight Club was simultaneously a biting critique of consumer society and a mockery of revolutionary methods of resistance. As the director himself stated, Fight Club is above all a comedy, so many characters are intentionally portrayed as ludicrous rather than tragic. Moreover, by the end of the film, the sympathies of the creators are clearly with the narrator, who becomes disillusioned with protest. Tyler Durden, the charismatic leader of the resistance, meets the undesirable end. However, many of the film's theses, often erroneously perceived as a guide to action, led to the film repelling potential viewers upon its release. On the other hand, the film's ambiguity later contributed to its popularity, especially among those viewers who identified with the main character, finding no satisfaction in life. For them, rebellion against the system seemed like the only way out of the crisis, even if they themselves were not capable of it.
Stop trying to control everything and just let go. Let go!
How is Fight Club made? Fight Club is a psychodrama, meaning that the creators predominantly depict events subjectively rather than objectively. There are not many scenes in the film shot from the perspective of an impartial observer. Most of the time, we see what is happening through the eyes of the character played by Edward Norton. Fight Club literally begins with the visualization of processes occurring in the protagonist's brain, and the entire film is accompanied by sharp voiceover commentary from the narrator, a cinematic equivalent to a stream of consciousness.
It's called a changeover. The movie goes on, and nobody in the audience has any idea.
Moreover, the visual sequence strongly reinforces the words of the character. For example, if the dialogue revolves around a bomb, it will invariably appear on the screen, and this tautology often elicits a comedic effect. To convey the protagonist's unstable state, the creators utilized innovative computer technologies, allowing for previously unimaginable choreography of the camera. The excessively perfect panoramas and flights illustrate the workings of cognition and the flight of thought. In the bedroom scene, the use of unnatural graphics hints at the blurred line between reality and imagination. The extensive use of advanced effects would later become a regular practice for Fincher, even in films that give the impression of realism. Although the director is often criticized for his apparent ruthlessness towards his characters, the camera in his films, through careful intraframe editing, attentively observes the characters, allowing the audience to subtly connect with them. This sets Fincher apart from Kubrick, whom the director was frequently compared to in the past. In Kubrick's works, characters often become mere elements of an elaborate mise-en scene, whereas, in Fincher's films, all attention is directed towards them. Simple yet effective transitions, such as from the character's face to what he sees, serve the same purpose. However, we not only see, but also thanks to innovative sound design, hear what the characters hear.
What?
In other words, the central location of the film evidently becomes the narrator's head. Aesthetically, Fight Club is close to punk rock, but even closer to grunge, an intentionally sloppy style in music that peaked in the 90s. Grunge, like Fight Club, was also a phenomenon of protest culture, disrupting conventional notions of acceptability in music. From it, Fincher adopted dirty colors, contrasting with the depressive grayish-green hues, primarily associated with the office period in the narrator's life. Sharp panning and other expressive visual decisions are also largely influenced by grunge aesthetics. Not to mention that the deliberately tasteless wardrobe of Tyler Durden was inspired by the images of musicians, particularly grunge icon Kurt Cobain. Although the musical duo, the Dust Brothers, who composed the soundtrack for the film, is not associated with grunge. Electronic music from the very beginning immerses the viewer in an aggressive, extremely discomforting sonic environment. Against this backdrop, the final song by the Pixies, whose work incidentally inspired Cobain, brings the desired relief after the intense 2-hour narrative. Furthermore, Fincher, who started his career in the commercial video industry, advertising and music videos, doesn't miss the chance to satirize himself. For example, in the mocking adaptation of a furniture catalog or a series of dark still lives, showing the messy side of consumption unlike in advertisements. As a postmodern work, Fight Club disregards film conventions and disrupts the illusion of the audience's immersion in the narrative. For instance, through breaking the fourth wall and clever meta-commentaries. Before meeting Tyler Durden, the protagonist sees him in a TV commercial. Later, Brad Pitt's character repeatedly briefly appears in the frame. As we learn from the narrator, Tyler worked as a film projectionist and sometimes spliced indecent photos into movies. This suggests that he could have had a hand in the editing of Fight Club itself, and even show it in a theater, hinted by the short frames with male genitalia in the final scene, and the moment with perforated film. Male-female. By the end of the 20th century, as white spots on the map became fewer, societal condemnation of violence grew, and traditional notions of masculinity began to fade into the past. In the era of post-industrial economies, and the emergence of the third wave of feminism, it became clear that men needed to redefine their place in the world. Tyler Durden wittily observes this in one of his most famous monologues.
We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no Great War, no Great Depression.
Fight Club serves as an expression of these existential concerns, both in its original novel form and its quite faithful film adaptation. It's noteworthy that the pivotal events of the film begin with the story of a group of testicular cancer patients who no longer feel like men. The creators address issues of masculinity repeatedly.
You're gonna publicly state that there is no underground group. Or these guys are gonna take your balls.
You said if anyone ever interferes with Project Mayhem, even you, we gotta get his balls.
Even visually presenting one of the meetings as a scene reminiscent of a high school dance, where girls invite boys to dance. Notably, at least two effeminate men appear in the film, Bob and the unnamed character played by Jared Leto. From this perspective, Fight Club has not lost its relevance to this day. It's a film about the crisis of male identity, about outdated pressures of gender norms that dictate men to be strong. However, for the characters, the only way to deal with their complexes is through violence.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
What?
However, the fights in basements and parking lots, originally intended to give some meaning to their lives, quickly evolve into something greater, the Project Mayhem, a program aimed at overthrowing authorities and sparking a new cultural revolution. This partly reflects the crisis of Western individualism, considered the foundation for the political consciousness of Americans. It's not a coincidence that therapeutic meetings play a significant role in the film. First, the support group, and then the Fight Club, their grim reflection. Such collectives, like the quasi-family of the narrator in Tyler Durden, help overcome the atomization of society and restore connections between people. Tyler Durden himself, in character, resembles not so much a cunning leader of a guerrilla cell, as commonly perceived, but a typical self-help guru for men, akin to Tom Cruise's character in Magnolia, which was released a couple of months after Fincher's film.
Respect the cock.
Self-improvement is masturbation. Now self-destruction.
The only woman in the film who receives sufficient screen time is Marla Singer. Researchers often label her as a femme fatale, which combined with the decadent cityscape and the off-screen voice, allows one to loosely classify Fight Club as neo-noir. Although Marla maintains independent thinking and overall appears as one of the most vivid heroines of the 90s, closer to the climax she ends up as a damsel in distress, and after, she becomes the salvation for Norton's character. There is a popular opinion that Marla is also an alternative personality of the narrator. However, if that's the case, the main character remains in illusions, and the whole pathos of the ending, where he reconciles with the feminine aspect and gets a chance at a new life, loses its significance.
You fuck me, then snub me. You love me, you hate me. You show me a sensitive side, then you turn into a total asshole. Is that a pretty accurate description of our relationship, Tyler?
The actors in Fight Club also seize the opportunity to break away from their usual roles and try something new. Helena Bonham Carter, before working with Fincher, was primarily known for roles as aristocrats in British period dramas. Edward Norton played a self-doubting office worker, contrasting with his role as a brutal neo-Nazi in American History X, and Brad Pitt once again proved that he is not only capable of charming romantic roles.
This
conversation
is over.
David Fincher's film is a product of a complex, contradictory era. Each new generation of viewers, whether experiencing a Great War or a Great Depression, is likely to interpret Fight Club in its own way. Thanks to its ambiguity, the film has stood the test of time and is rightfully considered one of the best in the history of cinema. Many techniques and methods used by the director may seem commonplace today, but at the time, it was innovative cinema, unfairly overlooked among a series of bright premieres. In today's context, Fincher's film almost serves as a therapeutic tale about the importance of not losing oneself in strange times. Therefore, if any of your friends, real or imaginary, haven't seen it, perhaps it's worth disregarding the first rule of Fight Club